I caught my son staring at me. What followed was unthinkable. That night I was standing at the kitchen sink washing the last of the dinner plates. The soft yellow light from the kitchen overhead created dim reflections on the counter, but then I felt it, a presence, eyes on me. I turned slightly and saw my son standing in the hallway, still and silent. His gaze was not the usual absent-minded look. It was deep, searching, filled with something I couldn't name. I softly called his name, expecting him to look away or smile, but he didn't. He stood there staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. And then something shifted in the air, like the world had tilted. I pretended not to notice the tension in his eyes and turned back to the sink, letting the warm water run over my hands longer than necessary. My heart started to beat faster. I've always been attuned to energy, to moods, to what goes unsaid, and something about that moment, his presence, his stillness, made me uneasy. When I turned back around, he was gone. I heard the faint creak of the stairs and the soft thud of his bedroom door closing. It should have ended there, a glance, a pause, a silence, but no, it lingered. That feeling followed me. That night I lay in bed trying to reason it away. Teenagers are strange, moody, unpredictable. Maybe he was lost in his thoughts. Maybe he was angry about something. Maybe I had imagined the intensity of that gaze. But no matter how many ways I tried to explain it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. I kept replaying the image of his eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, almost pleading, and the silence that spoke louder than any conversation ever could. The next morning he came down late, mumbled a quick "morning," grabbed toast, and avoided eye contact. This was unlike him. He was usually warm, playful, teasing even. The following days only deepened my unease. His silence stretched longer. He would watch me when he thought I wasn't looking, then quickly turn away. At dinner he would sit across from me, his eyes drifting to my hands, to my face, lingering just a bit too long before flicking back to his plate. It wasn't just curiosity. There was a charge to it, an awareness that shouldn't have been there. I started questioning everything. Had I been too open with him emotionally after the divorce, too vulnerable? We had leaned on each other during those early months, me shattered by betrayal, and him caught between two parents, confused and angry. We'd cooked together, laughed together, cried during movie nights. He had seen me at my most broken, and I had leaned on him more than I ever expected. I told myself it was maternal innocent, but now I wasn't so sure. One evening I called him downstairs to help me with the groceries. He came as usual without complaint. As we unpacked the bags, our hands brushed. A simple thing, but we froze. I looked at him sharply, and he looked at me with a flicker of something that made my stomach twist. Fear, guilt, longing. I stepped back and busied myself in the fridge. The moment passed, but the crack had widened. Neither of us spoke of it, but the air between us had changed. That weekend he asked if we could watch something together just like we used to. I hesitated, then nodded. Maybe I was imagining all of this. Maybe he just missed the closeness we once had. I made popcorn. He picked the movie and we settled onto the couch. But even then, I felt it. The space between us was charged. The stolen glances, the careful avoidance of touch. He sat close, but not touching me. His body was angled slightly toward mine. I could feel his warmth, his attention. Midway through the film, I excused myself to the kitchen. I needed air, I needed space. I leaned on the counter and took a long, shaky breath. This was getting dangerous, not because of anything he had done, but because of what I was beginning to feel: confused, flattered, disturbed, and very, very aware. I was his stepmother. I had raised him. I had watched him grow. And now I was thinking things no mother or stepmother should be thinking. What was happening to me, I decided then to pull back, to create distance for both our sakes. I started staying in doorways, avoiding close contact, watching him when he thought I wasn't looking. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, just something to weather until things went back to normal. One night I found myself crying quietly into my pillow. I missed the simplicity of our relationship before all this confusion crept in. I missed the innocence. The laughter, the feeling of being safe around him. I missed being his mother. Not this complicated, guilt-ridden version of myself who flinched at his touch and avoided his gaze. I blamed myself for needing him too much after the divorce, for treating him like an equal, a confidant when I should have drawn firmer lines, but I also knew something had shifted in him too. He was no longer a boy, and I was no longer just a maternal figure. We were both walking a dangerous line, silent, blurred, and unspoken. Then came the night that would change everything. It started like any other quiet routine until he knocked on my bedroom door. Softly, I sat up, surprised. It was late. I hesitated before answering. "Come in," I said, my voice barely audible. He opened the door, stepped in slowly, and closed it behind him. And in that moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. He stood by the door for a few seconds, unsure of whether to come closer or retreat. I could see it in his eyes, the turmoil, the hesitation, the flicker of something that bordered on fear, but did not quite become it. I sat on the edge of the bed, frozen, unsure of what to say. My robe was tied tightly, my hair still damp from the shower, and I suddenly felt very aware of how I looked. He took one slow step forward, then another. His voice, when it finally came, was low and shaking. I need to talk to you." I nodded, motioning toward the chair in the corner, but he ignored it and sat beside me on the bed. Too close, my heart thudded in my chest. I could feel the heat from his arm, the tension in the space between us. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral, maternal safe. But it came out softer than I intended. Too soft. His eyes met mine, and in that gaze was everything I had been trying to ignore for weeks. He wasn't hiding it anymore, and I wasn't blind to it. "I know you have noticed," he said finally. "The way I look at you, the way I feel around you. I've tried to stop, God knows I have, but I can't. I don't want to lie anymore." His voice cracked slightly, but he held my gaze. "You're not just my stepmother. You're something else." I felt the breath leave my lungs like I had been punched. I stood up quickly, pacing to the other side of the room. "You don't know what you're saying," I whispered. "You're confused. We've been close. Too close. I let that happen, and I shouldn't have. But what you're feeling, it's not real. It's just misplaced emotion. You're lonely. So am I. But this isn't the way." He stood too, but didn't move toward me. "Do you really believe that?" he asked. "Because I see the way you look at me, I hear it in your silence. You're scared, so am I, but that doesn't make it any less real." There was no anger in his voice, only sadness and certainty. "I'm not asking you for anything, I just needed to say it, to be honest, for once." I turned away, my fingers gripping the edge of the dresser. My reflection in the mirror looked pale, trembling, ashamed. "You're my son," I said, "maybe not by blood, but in every way that matters. You were a boy when you came into my life. I raised you. I protected you. I'm supposed to love you like a mother, and I do. But not like this." There was silence then. "So you do feel it," he whispered. His voice was barely audible. "You just don't want to." I turned slowly, our eyes locking again, and I hated him for seeing me so clearly, for knowing the part of me I had buried. I did feel something I had tried to bury with logic, with shame, with every moral fiber in my being. But it was still there, breathing alive, pulsing just beneath the surface. He took a step forward. "You think I don't know how wrong this is?" he whispered. "I do. I know it every time I wake up and remember who you are to me, but I also know what I feel. And I'm not here to push you. I just need you to know that I see you not as someone broken, not as someone used up by what your ex did. I see you, and I care about you deeply." His voice cracked, and for the first time he looked like the boy I remembered, lost, vulnerable human. And something inside me shattered. I walked past him toward the window, opening it slightly to let the cold night air in. My skin prickled. My heart ached. How did we get here? "I need time," I said finally. "I need space to think, to feel this all the way through, because right now I don't know who I am or who we are." He nodded, tears welling in his eyes but not falling. "I will wait," he whispered, "even if it's forever." He left the room quietly, closing the door behind him. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, shaking. There were no easy answers, no clear lines anymore, just the raw truth of what had been said and what hadn't, and the echo of it in every beat of my heart. The days that followed were fragile, tender, cautious. We barely spoke except in passing. The tension had turned into something softer, a respectful distance, maybe even mourning for a line that could not be uncrossed. But I noticed the shift in myself, how I was no longer hiding from the truth of what I felt, but sitting with it, examining it, questioning where it came from, and what it meant. Then one evening he left a note on the kitchen table. No pressure, just a few simple lines. I understand I love you in whatever way I am allowed to. Thank you for not shutting me out. And I cried reading it. Not because it was romantic, but because it was kind and real and from someone who had loved me, with all the confusion of youth and the courage of someone willing to be misunderstood. I would never forget that night, or the quiet confession that changed everything, but I would also not allow it to destroy what little I had rebuilt of myself. I owed that to both of us. And perhaps in some strange and painful way, it was love. Just not the kind the world would ever approve of, but it was love nonetheless. The house had become quieter than usual, not the kind of silence that brings peace, but the kind that tightens around the chest and lingers in the spaces between breaths. Every room held a memory of what had been said. Every glance we exchanged in passing felt too long or too brief. I started avoiding mirrors, not because of shame exactly, but because of the questions in my own eyes. Questions I did not yet know how to answer. I found myself tiptoeing through my own life. The living room, where we used to sit and watch movies, now felt like a stage after a performance, empty, echoing, used. The kitchen table bore the invisible weight of that handwritten note he had left me. I had folded it carefully, then unfolded it again so many times that the crease was starting to tear. There was nothing vulgar in his words, nothing overt, but they carried a raw honesty that I had not been prepared for. I understand I love you in whatever way I am allowed to. How do you respond to something like that? Some nights I lay awake listening for his footsteps in the hallway, wondering if he too was staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment, wondering what could have been, or what should never have been said. We had both crossed an emotional threshold, and though no physical line had been breached, the intimacy of truth, naked, unfiltered, had shifted everything. The part of me that wanted to run to pretend it had never happened clashed violently with the part that wanted to cradle that moment and dissect every inch of it. I kept asking myself, did I lead him there? Was I too soft, too lonely? Or was it something more complicated? Something about human need, about emotional proximity, about healing through unexpected connections. I remembered the way he had looked at me, not like a son, not like a boy, but like a man. Seeing a woman he respected, admired, and yes, maybe desired. That recognition alone stirred something dangerous inside me. It wasn't just about him. It was about me, about what I had become in the aftermath of my marriage, about how invisible I had started to feel in my own skin, and how a single gaze, his gaze, had made me feel alive again, seen not as a mother, not as a caretaker, but as a woman. And that terrified me. I started doubting every interaction we had ever shared, every innocent hug, every laugh in the kitchen, every time he had brought me coffee without asking. Had he been trying to say something all along, or was this feeling new for both of us? Something born out of grief, of silence, of living too close for too long. One afternoon I came home early from work and found him sitting on the back porch alone, staring out at the fading light. I watched him through the screen door for a moment. He looked older, somehow wiser, as if speaking his truth had cost him something, or perhaps it had liberated him. I stepped out quietly, and when he turned, he offered a soft smile. Nothing more. We sat in silence, the air between us thick with words unsaid. Finally I spoke. "I've been thinking a lot." He nodded, but didn't interrupt. "I don't know what this means," I continued, "or what it says about me, about you, but I need you to understand that I care deeply, and that is why I need us to be careful. Not because I want to push you away, but because I don't want to hurt either of us." His jaw tensed slightly, and I saw him swallow down his emotion before speaking. "I know and I respect that I wish things were simpler. Me too," I whispered. He reached over not to touch me, but to rest his hand on the armrest between us, a gesture of closeness that did not cross a line. That was the hardest part of all, how good it felt to be near him, and how wrong it would be to lean into that comfort. That night I cried in the shower. Not for him, for me, for all the versions of myself I had buried to be who I was supposed to be. A wife, a mother, a caretaker, a woman who never allowed herself to want. And now when something unexpected had awakened that part of me, it came cloaked in impossibility. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the lesson was not about what could happen between us, but about recognizing the parts of me that had been asleep. He had held up a mirror, and though the reflection scared me, it also reminded me that I was still here, still whole, still worthy of being seen, not just for what I give, but for who I am. Weeks passed, and though the air between us remained tender, it was also respectful. We did not speak about that night again, not because we were afraid, but because we both understood what it meant. That moment had not been about crossing a boundary, it had been about seeing one another fully, maybe for the first time. And sometimes that is enough. He began spending more time out of the house, reconnecting with friends, applying for jobs, focusing on his future. I supported him quietly, proudly. I noticed the way he smiled more easily now, the way his shoulders carried less weight. As for me, I started taking small steps back toward myself. I enrolled in a pottery class. I joined a book club. I sat in cafes with no purpose other than to feel sunlight on my face and remind myself I was still becoming, still allowed to grow. One evening, he came home with a small potted plant. He placed it on the kitchen windowsill and said, "It's for you, something new." I smiled, not at the plant, but at the gesture. It was simple, pure, and filled with everything we had chosen to preserve: love, care, and a boundary held with grace. We never needed to define what had passed between us. Some things are better left in the quiet space where two hearts once met and decided silently to let love exist without needing more from it. And in that choice, we found our healing together. The house, though quieter, no longer felt empty. It had transformed into something new, not free from the shadows of the past, but tempered by the understanding of what we had both learned. The spaces between us, once filled with confusion and tension, were now filled with something else: respect, a deeper awareness, and in a way, peace. We still had moments of silence, of course, but it wasn't the oppressive kind. It was the kind that comes with shared experience, with knowing that the most important things don't always need to be said. And every so often I'd catch his eye from across the room, and we'd share a look, an unspoken understanding that said everything we needed to know. There would always be questions. Questions about the past, about what could have been, about what we would have done differently. But with each passing day, we learned that some things are better left unspoken. The silence between us, once heavy and laden with guilt, had transformed into something lighter, more comfortable. And as I sat there in the warmth of the kitchen, a cup of tea in my hand, looking out the window at the setting sun, I realized that life was no longer something to fear. It was something to live, to navigate with care, with honesty, and with a quiet strength that came from knowing I was still here, still capable of change, still worthy of love, no matter how complicated it had all been. And maybe that was the greatest lesson of all.